So thank you everyone for joining us today for the second in our series of Time to Talk events. Sadly, we weren't able to have this one in person, but luckily we've been able to host this Zoom, so that's been really good. So we have a panel with us, and I will let the vice chair of the Equal Independent Advisory Group, Jeremy, introduce some of our panel speakers and talk to us a little bit more about what will be happening today. From a logistics point of view, when we do take part in the Q&A part of the session, if everybody could keep their microwaves, sorry, I'm obviously thinking about food at 6 p.m. If everyone could keep their mics off on mute, unless they are asked to unmute for any reason. And if we have questions during Q&A, if we could send those questions via the chat function, and I will ask the questions just for ease so that everyone gets an opportunity to raise the questions that they would like to raise. We have a 10-minute slot at the end for anyone in the audience who has any experience directly of the youth justice system and would like to share some of their lived experience with the group. So if you would like to do that, please do let me know in the chat function. And I will hand over to Jeremy Crook.
Thank you. Thank you, Sade. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm hoping that we're going to get the PowerPoint come up on the screen shortly, and I will go through a short presentation before I introduce the speakers. As you all know, this is a very important and serious issue, and Equal has been grappling with this challenge and working very closely with colleagues for quite a few years to improve the situation and tackle the issues that we need to tackle, which we'll hopefully have a very good conversation this evening about. We've titled this conversation, Time to Talk, the Injustice of Youth Justice. I'm delighted to be facilitating this evening. My name is Jeremy Crook. I'm the Chief Executive of the Black Trading and Enterprise Group and also the Vice Chair of Equal and its National Independent Advisory Group. We've got three very important and impressive speakers with us this evening. We've got Keith Fraser, the former superintendent in the West Midlands Police and now the chair of the Youth Justice Board. And I've known Keith for a couple of years now, it feels like, and I'm delighted he's joining us, and he's got a very important role to play in this challenge of minimising the number of young people in custody, but also tackling disproportionality, which I know Keith is very passionate about. Nina Simota, I've also known for a very long time, and she's the Director of Criminology and Sociology at St Mary's University. And Nina has a long track record of working around criminal justice policy and trying to improve outcomes, especially in relation to Black and Asian communities and other minority communities. And I'm really pleased that Nina's joined us today as well. And we've got Sami Odi, who's the founder of Wipers Youth CIC, a social enterprise working to empower young people. And Sami is a qualified social worker as well, and has been doing some excellent work in this space for a number of years as well. Thank you. We move forward. The Youth Justice Select Committee inquiry into children and young people in custody concluded that race disproportionality is significant and fundamental, visible in every part of the youth justice system. And that was November 2020, very recently, i.e. this month. So there's no surprise there, I'm sure, to many people on the call. And these statistics here just kind of set out and embellish the challenge we've got. Black children are 4 times more likely, excuse me, to be arrested than white children. Since 2005, the percentage of Black youth in custody has doubled. Currently, over 50% of youth justice system is made up of young Black and Asian young people. Our start in this issue was 6 years ago. BTEG worked very closely with CLINCS the national infrastructure organisation in the criminal justice system, voluntary sector. And we embarked on a journey which was kind of branded and called the Young Review with Baroness Lola Young, and we published our findings back in 2014. It was kind of a precursor to the Lama Review in some respects, but we focused very much on the experiences of young Black men and young Muslim men between the age of 18 and 24. And we made 6 recommendations. Some of those were about better data, also about the need to engage and involve Black and Asian-led organizations and Muslim organizations in particular in providing services to their communities. Sadly, we've still got a long way to go to see a robust contribution being made by Black and Asian organizations in the youth justice system and adult system. So we're still trying to ensure that government appreciates the importance of our organizations making a contribution and working collaboratively with the public sector, local authorities, and obviously large and small providers in the justice system. But for us, it was a very important document which led on to the creation of the Equal initiative, which we're now part of. And BTEG is the secretariat for the Equal National Independent Advisory Group, which is chaired by Iqbal Wahab. Iqbal has got an OBE, not an MBE, so apologies for that. And Iqbal is our independent chair and very committed to making sure that we see a fairer justice system and much better outcomes for Black and Asian young people, particularly when they come out the system and can find good employment. But we're all committed to making sure that the numbers of young Black and Asian people is greatly reduced before they actually come in contact with the justice system. And Equal has a very good advisor group. Nina and Sammy, who you'll hear from, are part of the advisor group, along with the Prison Reform Trust and Clinks, as I mentioned, are also members, along with several other organisations, and they make a really important contribution. We work very closely with the Her Majesty's Prison and Probation Service, Youth Justice Board. We also work with police organisations and local level police as well. Essentially, Equal works within the system to try and improve it. We also appreciate and value those that work outside the system. And hopefully together we'll make the justice system and the youth justice system a much more effective and balanced provision in this country. We have 3 priority areas in Equal. In terms of prison and probation, we obviously want to improve outcomes for Black and Asian individuals in the justice system, in the prison system and probation. And also we want to see a much more ethnically balanced workforce at all levels, not just at the kind of middle and bottom levels. So senior leadership is very important, and we want to see that reflected in the prison and probation service, and in fact the whole justice system, quite frankly. Our other priority is policing and BAME young people. I apologise to anyone who does not like the acronym BAME. We are reviewing that as a acronym and term, but essentially we are talking about individuals from African Caribbean, South Asian, Southeast Asian backgrounds in terms of ethnicity, and we use that for the time being until we decide on a better term. But I'm very keen that we don't get caught up on terms. We look at the kind of issues at hand, which is disproportionality and then the high numbers of young Black and Asian people, particularly young Black people in the youth justice system. And we are obviously trying to reduce that. Stop and search is clearly a major issue, and the way that our communities and young people are policed is a difficult challenge that we want to see very immediate change where we can. And we want to see a policing service that supports communities, polices communities, but does so in a fair way and doesn't create massive disparities as it does with the stop and search that's been there for a very long time, and more recently the kind of gangs matrix that a number of police forces operate, which also have large numbers of young Black people and young Black men and boys in particular represented. And third, and finally, coming to today's event, the youth justice system. I think we registered our concerns with the Youth Justice Board 4 or 5 years ago, and we've kind of met and worked with, I think, 3 chairs of the YJB, and I'm very delighted that Keith is the current chair. I think Keith may be the first black male chair in my recollection. Keith can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm delighted that we've got Keith in a senior role in the YJB, i.e. the chair, and that's really important. And we do work with Keith in the YJB, and we look forward to working with him going forward. This graph shows the current breakdown of young people in youth custody. Keith will, I'm sure, show some more data, but we just wanted to highlight the numbers and to show the 51.6% in an actual number for Black and Asian and minority ethnic young people, which is 316 compared to 297 for white young people. I know that we all don't want to see young people and children in custody, and the YJB, the government, everyone concerned has done a good job at reducing the numbers down over the last 10 years. Because I know it was in the kind of near the 3,000s and we've come down to less than 1,000. So clearly there's been success there, but the disproportionality, unfortunately, has risen for Black and Asian young people, and particularly Black young people. Thank you. I'll now hand over to Keith. Welcome, Keith.
Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you for that setting the context. And I will kind of go over and sort of like reinforce some of the positions that you've mentioned earlier on. I'm really pleased to be here with you all today. I just want to give you a little bit of a background around me that Jeremy touched on in relation to me. And for those of you who don't know who I am, I joined the Youth Justice Board in January of 2018 as a board member. And then in April of this year, I was appointed as the chair of the Youth Justice Board for England and Wales by the Secretary of State. I joined the Youth Justice Board after a long career in the police service, where I worked through various positions from being a constable to a superintendent, with periods working in the Metropolitan Police Service in London, and then also working in the West Midlands. I've been the chair of the Youth Offending Team Management Board, served as the Strategic Police Lead for the Prince's Trust in the West Midlands, and I've also worked with children directly and indirectly for at least 30 years. And being an advocate for children in our system, especially those who are vulnerable, is incredibly important to me. So I'm really pleased to get this opportunity to be here with you today. First of all, I wanted to set a bit of a wider context about what we're talking about today. And I wanted to kind of underline something which isn't always spelled out, but I think is quite obvious to all of us. And that is that the justice system does not exist in a bubble. So we need to also look upstream, but also it's not acceptable that children, because of their background, are more likely to be criminalised than others. And also questions, why is the system working far better for white children than it is for children from Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities? So I think there's an important thing we need to do here. I think all of us need to get behind, and that is about explaining why there is this disparity, or reforming it if we can't explain it. And we need to invest in solutions which are going to support these children. And the question I'd put to all of us is, what if it was your child? We would want to ensure the system was fair in relation to the justice system for our children. It's great to have this platform to speak about children in the justice system, but there's also something else I wanted to remind us of, and that is that 99.8% of white children do not touch the justice system, and 99.7% of Black, Asian and minority children don't touch the justice system. We're talking about a small but important percentage or number of children who disproportionately come into the justice system. So therefore, when you look at it within that context, surely there is something that can be done. But also present that wider context to try and negate some of the stereotypes that we may have around children that are in the system. I think another important aspect is also about thinking about the needs of those children in the system. We sometimes see them as different to the needs of other children. And I think you'd be interested to know that 71% of the children that are in the system are found to have had mental health needs. 71% of children have got speech, communication and language needs. And also 75% of children have substance misuse needs. Now, we've only recently found out that information as a result of analysing the data of all of the children that were sentenced in the years starting from April 2019 through to from April 2018 through to March 2019. Now, that's really interesting in relation to thinking about what it is that we need to be looking at when we start to think about upstream in relation to that. And we look at about 19 areas of need in relation to looking at what's happening for children that are in the system. In relation to those 19 areas of need, Black, Asian and minority children are likely to have more of those needs. So they're likely to have about 5 or more of those needs, so a higher proportion of those needs than other children that are in the system. I'm also aware that education has been a long-standing area of concern for Gypsy, Romani and traveller children, with the issues such as low attainment and high rates of temporary and permanent exclusion. The negative impact that exclusions can have on a child's future prospects is well known. For example, there was a study done by the University of Edinburgh back in 2016, which found that excluded students are 4 times more likely as other children to be sent to prison as adults. We cannot therefore allow for this wasted potential and for exclusions to continue to feed a cycle of alienation that often leads to crime. This is sometimes known as the school to prison pipeline. The education and economic inclusion of Gypsies, Romani and travellers is therefore more important than ever, and we continue to work together to find solutions which seek to avoid the school to prison pipeline for these children and other communities. The most common reason for exclusions and moving further along the school to prison pipeline is persistent disruptive behaviour in school. And whilst exclusions with alternative provisions may be necessary in some cases, we also need to have a greater awareness of the underlying causes of disruptive behaviour. For example, consideration of what thoughts and feelings may have impacted on the behaviour, rather than just focusing on the behaviour itself. Inclusion is therefore important to the Youth Justice Board and myself personally, and we have considered this within our strategic priorities. I want to look wider at overrepresentation and give you some more information in relation to that. In relation to mental health, Black, Asian and minority ethnic children are 3 times less likely to be diagnosed with a mental disorder. However, 4 times more likely to be detained under the Mental Health Act. In relation to special educational needs, Gypsy, Roma and traveller children have the highest rates in relation to special educational needs. In relation to school exclusions, as I've said earlier on, Gypsy, Romani and traveller children have the highest levels of exclusion. In relation to becoming a victim, children of mixed origin were the most likely to be victims of crime. In relation to arrests, as Jeremy has said earlier on, Black children are 4 times more likely to be arrested than white children. In relation to out-of-court disposals, which is a way of kind of preventing people and children from coming through any further on into the system, minority children are less likely to receive an out-of-court disposal than their white counterparts. In relation to committing offences and most serious offences, 61% of the most serious offences are actually committed by white children. Yet, when you look at the population within the secure estate, 53% of those within the secure estate are from minority backgrounds. Most common was in relation to violence against the person. 72% of those were committed by white children. And yet the proportion of children in custody for committing violence against the person offences was 41% white and 62% black. Minority children are more likely to receive immediate custody and almost twice as likely to receive custodial sentences than white children. In relation to the secure estate, there's disparity there as well. In relation to the Black, Asian and minority children are more likely to be to find themselves in the youth offending institutions, and white children are more likely to be in the secure children's homes. In relation to rehabilitation and resettlement, secure children's homes appear to be more successful in relation to that. And also the use of remand. In relation to remand, Black, Asian and minority children make up 57% of those that are on remand in custody. In relation to resettlement, resettlement appears to work better for white children, and once a minority child is in the system, they are more likely to come back into the system. As you can see there are many questions which we need to get some answers to and need to understand what we're all doing about this. So a quick snapshot here of what we're doing about this. We produced a tool, an interactive tool called Exploring Racial Disparity, and that's available to all of you on the internet, and it will give you access to all of this data and wider data in relation to disparities. So that's in and out of the justice system. So you can get a deeper understanding of what's happening to children in that wider sense, not just in the justice system, as I say, but wider. We're also looking at the impact of COVID-19 on Black, Asian and minority ethnic children, and how that could be impacting on their journey into the criminal justice system. And that work is happening in 2 boroughs in London. We've also looked at some and commissioned a piece of research in relation to disproportionate outcomes in relation to remand and sentence outcomes. And that work is due to be published later on this year. We also continue to challenge government departments and statutory agencies in relation to disproportionality, and also work on some innovative ideas in relation to using the power of sport to prevent children coming into the justice system, and also to prevent them coming back in. And I will talk about that more later if people have got some questions. We're also looking at employment. I've recently chaired an employment roundtable where we had over 100 delegates from across government, from the third sector, and also from communities, and also from those who had lived experience, looking at employment specifically focused around those from minority communities who are in and around the system. I'm also particularly pleased to say that we've been working with the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners as well to actually give them access as well to something which we call the Disproportionality Toolkit, so that they can look and see what the disproportionality levels are in their areas, so they can consider having disproportionality amongst Black, Asian and minority children within their policing and crime plans. One of the things that I've found when I've looked across England and Wales is, despite the disproportionality amongst children being the biggest concern about disparities in the criminal justice system, it's not featuring on policing and crime plans across England and Wales. Now, I'm not saying it should be in every single one, but I'm saying we should at least be asking the question. I want to give police and crime commissioners that information so that they can ask that question, and if it's appropriate, it should be in those policing and crime plans, is what I would suggest. We also are supporting something which is called Pathfinders, and that's about working with the front line, working with youth offending teams, working with the police and others who are delivering and supporting youth justice within communities at a local level. And that's about developing good practice, us working with those services who are delivering it at the front line to actually try and find out what works, and then promulgating that good practice. And some other examples of what's happening is a Ministry of Justice pilot called A Chance to Change, and that's looking at deferred prosecutions. We've also got a number of London boroughs who have pulled together to develop a consortia who are working together to to develop ideas around reducing disproportionality. The London Mayor's Office has also got an action plan in relation to disproportionality. And we're also supporting a pathfinder in the West Midlands, which looked at supporting parenting and working with parents and carers around looking at other ways to reduce disproportionality. The only way that we can make a difference is by working together to do our bit. I often talk about tackling representation is like working out how to eat an elephant. And the answer is, as you well know, in small pieces, one bite at a time. But we must not be intimidated by the complexity or the size of the issue. And I'm really glad to be with you here today to ensure that the Youth Justice Board is working with you to eat a chunk of that elephant and ensuring that these children with such amazing potential get the support they need to achieve great things. I'm also seeking your support regarding tackling overrepresentation in the youth justice system. Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you, Keith. Much appreciated. A lot of important content there. And I hope the colleagues listening have got questions and comments to make shortly. I'm going to swiftly move to our next speaker, Dr. Nina Simota. Over to you, Nina.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. And it's really great. Keith has given us a really good context to work from, but also looking into the future where we are headed in relation to youth justice. And I'm hoping that our discussions with colleagues in the virtual space is going to create some more opportunity for better discussion about what Keith has actually proposed, which is about involving communities and really hearing those community voices. So I'm all for that. Thank you so much, Jeremy, and colleagues at BTEG for this invite, and also for organizing this very timely discussion on the injustice of youth justice. So basically, I want to sort of also say, not just in my capacity as program director, I'm a senior lecturer at St. Mary's University. I run the undergraduate criminology and sociology program, but I'm also wearing my other hat, which is I'm also a trustee of Stopwatch, which is an organization that is specifically looking at the use of police powers of stop and search. And I'm also joined by one of my colleagues from Stopwatch here this evening, which is fantastic because he'll also be able to add to our discussions on this really important subject. So I would like to, and it's also great to see, by the way, some of our my colleagues. I was looking through some of the names, so it's lovely to see some familiar faces online as well. And obviously, there's a great deal of expertise, as I can already see online. So I'm looking forward to the discussion later. I'd like to focus my short time really focusing our attention on the evidence of disproportionality, which has been a source of great injustice for the criminal justice system now for quite a number of decades. I'll then also try to highlight, I think this is an important part of the discussion, what is the role of the academy in ongoing discussions about race, racism, and ethnicity. And so it's lovely to be part of this discussion from that perspective as well. It's a great source of injustice when the disproportionate representation of young people, like Keith has outlined, from Black and minority ethnic groups actually remains quite acute and entrenched in mostly arrest, prosecution, and prison figures. And that is a problem, and it has been for some time. A lot has already been outlined by Keith. You all are well familiar with the ratios and proportions on ethnic disproportionality, racial disparities, and I certainly don't wish to labor that point, but I do want to pull out some of the key areas of concern, which are quite recent. And despite the ongoing work in response to the recommendations made by the Lamy Review, these are, I do want to spend some time outlining some of these broader themes that are problematic and continue to remain problematic, and also then linked to a discussion about youth justice and how do we do youth justice in a better way. And I think that's really, for me, that lies at the heart of our discussions today as well, about how to do it better and how communities can contribute to that. So inevitably, any discussion about disproportionality must start with the police as gatekeepers of the criminal justice system. And I'll be drawing from a recent submission that Stopwatch made to the Home Affairs Committee inquiry, examining the progress made over the last 20 years on recommendations made by the McPherson report. And I highlight this because I've been thinking a lot about it recently, writing a chapter about race, crime, and the criminal justice system for a criminology textbook. And it really gave me the opportunity to kind of go back into the past and come back to this moment this summer with BLM and the killing of George Floyd and the discussions that have been ongoing ever since, which is really important. So capturing all of that and bringing now some of the essence that we also presented to the Home Affairs Select Committee, the Home Affairs Committee inquiry, we at Stopwatch contended that the police use of stop and search remains disproportionately targeted against ethnic and religious minorities, and that this problem, in fact, has magnified over the 2 decades. So 20 years on from Lawrence, we are actually seeing a greater disproportionality. And these enduring issues and patterns of consistent racial disparity bring into question the effectiveness of stop and search as an effective tool for policing. And certainly, Keith also mentioned this time over the summer, like the pandemic, and certainly I do want to spend some time also talking about the response to the COVID-19 pandemic and in what way the police has actually responded to that, and highlight some of the areas in which perhaps disproportionality might be increasing. So Black and Asian people, as we all know, are more likely to be stopped and searched as a gateway to the criminal justice system. Therefore, policing activity remains at the center stage, and that includes, obviously, for young people as well. And I don't wish to elaborate on the data because the data is all there. In fact, we have a lot of data now, where previously we used to struggle to get the data. We have, in fact, abundant data. But again, in relation to particularly stop and search powers, we also noted at Stopwatch how Section 60 searches have become even more disproportionate now. And any protections that were introduced by the use of the best use of the stop and search scheme, at best, really, how weak it is in the sense that it is just voluntary kind of protection. So really, I think there are more discussions to be had at a policy level about how to engage with disproportionality. And I think a starting point where we have all learned about the different areas of disproportionality, but in our move forward, and I am looking at Keith because I think this takes a bigger discussion in relation to policy and how we can actually change policy in a very radical way. The over-policing is also, as we know, some of the work that we've done at Stopwatch is in fact driven by drugs policing. And of course, in that, a large proportion of young people that are involved in that as well. This has such an adverse impact on our communities. And statistically, there are obviously, as we know, lower levels of confidence in the local police from Black and particularly people of mixed heritage. Compared to white and Asian people. So that is also known, there's a statistically significant gap there. Introducing in this context, again, relevant for youth justice is the use of digital policing, which will further, looking into the future, is actually going to create more areas of concern in relation to entrenching racism. And the use of new technologies, we have already, in the work that we are doing at Stopwatch, uncovering the use of, for example, fingerprinting scanners, social media monitoring, mobile extraction, the data, and existing methods of profiling and surveilling different population groups. And again, in that, what protections have we afforded, young people? And that remains an area of concern as well. COVID, again, during the pandemic, COVID has seen a policing, we believe at Stopwatch, not from a public health approach, but mostly like Black and Asian people, figures suggest have been over-policed through COVID regulations. And what impact will that have, again, on us making an assessment of disproportionality in relation to young people as well? So stop and search has increased during the pandemic, and some of the data that we looked at, this obviously is an area of concern. Over-policing of Black and Asian people through also the COVID-19 emergency powers given to the police as well. And some of this data was uncovered by the Guardian analysis as well. And most of it, of course, was focused on London. You can have a look at that data as well. But again, another area for us to consider. In relation to, again, I don't wish to labor the point on figures, we have plenty. Heavy-handed, I think one interesting area that we should all kind of discuss and think about is the heavy-handed nature of policing, which remains prominent when it comes to policing people from Black and minority ethnic communities, particularly young people. Communities also in certain areas feel how territorial, the TSG support group are also used, and how heavy-handed policing is obvious to them in their areas. So the use of force, including, for example, the use of tasers, handcuffs, prior to an arrest, these issues have all increased for our communities, and therefore also brings into question what impact that is having on young people. It would be good to discuss to what extent the response to COVID-19 has been a policing rather than a public health response, and to what extent is the policing of pandemic and also the use of digital technologies, how is this further evidence of institutional bias and racism in the system? And in light of Black Lives Matter movement, the realities of these sort of racialized discriminatory policing practices also need to be consistently monitored and consistently accounted for. And this is something that we attempt to do at Stopwatch. The criminalization of young people, really about far too many opportunities, are provided to criminalize young people through law enforcement. And we really need to have a better look at what those points are, where does discretion lie, and what can we actually do about that? So there's more evidence on the nature of discriminatory practices that tend to stigmatize and criminalize young people more than other groups, young people from minority ethnic groups more than other groups. There's evidence that was presented to the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, which highlighted several areas of concern with regards to young people in the UK, where obviously children's rights were not being protected enough when it was about, especially in relation to contact with police. And this is something, again, that we need to address specifically. Other areas of concern highlighted earlier that affect the adult population as well is this overuse of stop and search, on children from Black and minority ethnic groups, specifically in the age group 15 to 19 years. And this was highlighted in the UN, the submission that was made to the UN committee. And this was some of the work that the Children's Rights Alliance, working with, in collaboration with other organizations, also highlighted. The gangs matrix, Keith had mentioned earlier, and Jeremy mentioned that as well, again, stigmatizes disproportionately children from Black and minority ethnic backgrounds. And the use of force is another area of concern for us, where, again, how spit hoods are being used by the police, how they affect young people, particularly, I know Keith had mentioned mental health issues as well. That is also particularly concerning, and how these tactics of policing can also have an impact, on young children, from children generally, but specifically as the over-policing is on young children from Black and minority ethnic groups. So that remains an area of concern. How is that used? We need to better understand all of this as well, and how that is happening out on the streets. Another area was also about criminal records and the impact, on the future outcomes of children from young people generally, but also children from Black and minority ethnic groups, because they obviously, like the figures suggested by Jeremy and Keith earlier, the more than half of the people in custody come from Black and minority ethnic backgrounds. So that is, sort of my way of expressing some concern around some of the recent and more kind of Other areas that we have known about for a while, but we need to really better understand how young people are being either criminalized, but also over-policed and also underprotected. To what extent young people from Black and minority ethnic groups are seen as victims of crime, are afforded the safeguards and protections that children should be given, and to what extent that is not happening. And at St. Mary's, we also have the Center for the Study of Modern Slavery. I run an MA program on human trafficking, migration, and organized crime. And I am aware of some work that is now ongoing to also consider the impact of legislation such as the modern slavery legislation, in which, of course, what proportion, we don't have enough data to start with in relation, broken down, disaggregated by ethnicity, but that also remains an area of concern, with the victim and perpetrator kind of angles about what extent young people do get exploited and in what way are they actually dealt with by the system. Are we actually recognizing needs? Are we actually doing enough prevention work, obviously, and I'm hoping we'll have a discussion on that as well. So I'll just leave that as a thought. And finally, to my point about, what is the role of the academy, the scholarship, the universities and the scholarly community. So there's heightened awareness of racial injustice and white privilege, a development both reflected and amplified by the Black Lives Matter movement this summer. But let's use that as a springboard really to make change. And I really feel that we have an opportunity to do not just change in a particular aspect of, like in the criminal justice system or the youth justice system. I'm more interested in kind of making this change wider and using this opportunity, this moment to really bring change. So here I'll bring some discussions we've had within criminology and sociology about the extent to which thinking about race and ethnicities and crime involves also critically examining, criminology examining itself as well as to the role that it has played, in examining and questioning to what extent and how much has criminology actually studied race, the ways in which perhaps it also has been complicit in entrenching racial inequality and racial hierarchies also within academia. So how we study this subject, who studies it, how it is done, what do we do about the numbers, the data that we explore, and how that is presented? Because again, this is a real concern about who does the research, what data is presented, and how is that actually received and conveyed. So the narrative and the discourse there is again quite important. And we've also, am I going over time, Jeremy? No, you're on mute. So I'll take that as a cue that I need to finish here now. So it's just about understanding our role also in the academy, to what extent we also need to work with community groups who actually really feel the pulse within communities and really understand the nature of issues. There is a language in academia that we use to present, to get, to write reports and everything, but actually that will be more meaningful and it'll really help to drive policy change. And we can work better with policymakers to drive that change if we actually work better with our communities and actually get engaged in the real work in the communities. So I'll sort of leave it there. Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you, Nina. Very interesting speech with lots of content, and I'm really pleased you highlighted the policing aspect. I'm going to move very swiftly on because I'm very keen that we allow participants to ask questions and we try and answer them in the time we've got. So I'm going to swiftly move on to Sami. Thank you, Sami. Welcome.
Thanks very much, Jeremy. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining. A big thank you to Nina and Keith. You've covered a lot of stuff there, and I'll maybe just touch on and elaborate a little bit on some of the stuff you've said from a community perspective. So I've got a few slides that I want to put up there. So Shade, I don't know if you can bring that up there. Okay, great. So we've heard a lot of data today. We've heard a lot of statistics, and I just want to re-emphasize this because I think sometimes when we hear a lot of numbers, we can sometimes lose focus in terms of what that really actually means. This was, as has been mentioned already, this was from The Guardian 2019, 51% of young people in our prisons in the United Kingdom are from Black, Asian, and ethnic minority backgrounds, 51%. That's bearing in mind that people from diverse communities in the United Kingdom only make up 14% of the population. So when you actually stop and just think about that, 51% of our young people in custody are from diverse communities. And we ask this question all the time, don't we? Why? Why is this happening? And there's been so many reports, and Sade, if you can go on to the next slide and keep just tapping it away, Sade, till you get to, okay, it's on there, brilliant. Yeah, if you go back one, these are a number of reports going back to McPherson report 1999 following the racist murder of Stephen Lawrence. And I could have added in another 10 or 15 reports. If you go to the next slide, Sade, you can see here just some of the front covers of those same reports. We know why this is happening. It just really frustrates me sometimes when we sit there, we go to these meetings, we talk about, we need to understand why. We have got so much research and academic body of evidence, as Nina just mentioned. We've got some of the best academics in the world. People come from all over the world to study at Oxford and Cambridge in our universities here in the UK. We're very good at doing reports, trying to understand what a problem is, and then coming up with recommendations. What we're not very good at doing is implementing those recommendations. And so what we do is we go round and round in circles, and 10, 20, 30 years, we're having the same conversations that we had 30 years ago, talking about disproportionality, and it's getting worse, which is really significant. In fact, in the last few years, when the Young Review came out in 2014, it was 42% of young people in prisons. So within the last 5 years, it's gone up 10%. That's a really significant jump in such a short space of time, that we now see 51% of our young people. So we've got an understanding of some of the structural and systemic factors that contribute to this disproportionality. Are we doing enough to challenge those? And that's where I'm coming from in terms of a community perspective. If we go to the next slide, some of you may be aware of this report by Amnesty International that came out called Trapped in the Matrix, which talked about the use of the gangs matrix, which for those is a database which the police keep of individuals which they believe are involved in gang activity. And in London, Manchester, Birmingham, the police forces there have been keeping that information, and they've been acting on that information, and that has been used to disproportionately stop, search, arrest, and target young people, in many cases children, from diverse communities. And this report highlighted how the matrix is being used in such a way that is contributing to some of this vast disproportionality that we're seeing. So at a glance, if you go to next one, Sade, one of the things I highlighted was that 80%, roughly 80% of names on this list are from young people from diverse communities, Black, Asian, ethnic minority young people. And similar proportion, 80% are young, so between the ages of 12 to 24. But then you have a large proportion who've been victims, 75%, and another significant amount who never committed any offences. It says there, if you can see, 35% haven't committed any serious offences, but there's also a significant portion that hadn't committed any offences whatsoever. And so this tool was an example of some of the structural and systemic and the policies that have been put in place that are contributing to this disproportionality. If you look at the serious violence list, the serious violence database, it was a much lesser amount. I think it was about 27% a few years back. That may have gone up recently with the rise in some serious violence in big cities, but 27% of names on the serious youth violence database were from young people from Black, Asian, ethnic minority communities. So you had this real disparity between 80% on the gangs matrix and 27% on the serious violence database. Joint enterprise is another one as well. So Dr. Patrick Williams and Becky Clark, Patrick sits with us on the Equal Group, produced this report, which kind of followed on from the use of the gangs matrix, but also the joint enterprise legislation, where it again highlighted how evidence was being used in court to disproportionately convict young people from Black, Asian, ethnic minority backgrounds. Very, very weak evidence such as being in a music video and showing an association, which on the face of it, you think, well, surely that can't be wouldn't be used in court. Well, it was being used in court, and it was being used in court, and convictions were happening disproportionately. And the Supreme Court reviewed all the convictions under the joint enterprise legislation a few years back, and held that a lot of them were unsafe. And to my knowledge, only one person has been released. I think some sentences have been commuted or shortened. But you're starting to get an understanding when people talk about structural inequality, systemic racism, you start to get an understanding of some of the policies that have been put in place that are contributing to this vast disproportionality that we're seeing in the youth justice system. And so there needs to be, we need to be challenging that. And that for me is when I talk about anti-racist, anti-oppressive practice, this is what we need to be doing. There's two parts to this discussion, okay? Often what happens is when we talk about disproportionality, we kind of move away from the external factors and we start focusing on the internal. And then we run the danger of falling into this narrative of blame and then looking at the individual and saying these young people are in the criminal justice system because they're getting kicked out of school. Okay, why? They're naughty, bad behavior, the music they listen to. It's this narrative that we've seen historically, which is we blame the individuals or we blame those communities for that disproportionality. We're seeing it with COVID. You know, we see this stuff on the news about COVID. BAME communities more likely to get COVID. And I'm like, you know, you hear the strap line, but where's the follow-on that talks about the structural health inequalities that we have in the United Kingdom? That's not mentioned. You know, in the United Kingdom, a Black woman is still more likely to die in childbirth than a white woman. In the year 2020, how is this possible? Do you know what I mean? So when we're looking at disproportionality, we're not just talking about the criminal justice system. You know, Keith alluded to this earlier. It's right the way through society. And some of those reports you can see there on your screen have highlighted this. The TUC Trade Union Congress report talked about employment. So if you're Black and you've got a first-class honours degree, you're still twice as likely to be unemployed than if you're white and have got a first-class honours degree. And we see the same when you look at H&C, H&D apprenticeships. We see that gap within there. So this is something which is, you know, as I say, the external and the internal. Now, a lot of the work I do in the community, I do a lot of work with young people from diverse communities, and I work on the internal. I work on their mentality. I work on the way in which we as individuals and as a community need to take power ourselves to start addressing this. Because if I'm quite honest with you, I'm fed up of going to all these meetings and we keep having the same conversation. Nothing's being done. And I feel that nothing's being done because the system is built in a certain way to perpetuate this inequality. You know, we talk about education. Kids, black Caribbean boys, more than 3-4 times likely to be excluded than white boys for the same behaviour. Ofsted knows this. Why is no one holding Ofsted accountable? Why is Ofsted not putting this in their criteria so that when they go to schools, they say, we know this is an issue, we've got the data, what are we doing about it? Nothing. Everyone just gets amnesia and it just drives me mad. You know, we need to start holding institutions accountable. This is what anti-racist practice means. And this is what I think everyone that is in this sector, if you're listening now and you're working in the sector, you've got to ask yourself, what am I doing personally to challenge this? Because these are our children that are being affected. You know, we can have conversations, but this is my son and my nephew, yeah, and my niece that are living the real life consequences of all the stuff that we're talking about. So we you know, I do get passionate about this because it's not just a conversation for me. This is, you know, this is my life. This is what people are living. And this is what I see in the community. So we need to start thinking about that. We've got, there's lots of organizations that are doing lots of good stuff on there. And I would encourage people to find out what organizations are leading this work and how you can contribute. I'm working at the moment with lots of organizations that are doing some really good work and helping progress and change to come about. And it does take time. But I think we need to start raising our voices because things are getting worse. And I think, you know, I spoke to a group of young people recently that went on the Black Lives Matter march and stuff, and they were just so upset about everything going on. And, you know, what I said to them was, listen, you've got to remember, I'm old enough to remember when people were protesting against the Iraq war. 1,000 people marched in London. 1,000, sorry, did I say 1,000? 1 million people. The crowds were huge, marching that they didn't want people to go to war, but they still went to war. So they're going to do what they're going to do. At the end of the day, you've got to figure out, how can I make social change from where I'm sitting? Yeah, you can go on marches, but there's organizations that are doing great work to actually move this ball forward. And BTEG is one of them, Equals one of them. Please, we need more people willing to contribute. If you're willing to go and stand in the cold and march and hold placards, get involved in a community level and figure out how we can make progress, because it's got to come from both ends. It's got to come from the external. We have to sit down at the table. We have to sit down and put pressure on institutions to make things happen. And then at the same time, the internal. So in our own communities, we've got responsibility to raise our voice to those young people who are experiencing this, and give them that internal power, that the thinking skills to be able to resist and put in the implementations on the ground. So I think I probably said all of that without taking a breath, but I get excited. So there's my email address. Please, anyone, take a picture of that email. Send me an email if there's things that you want to do to get involved, because the time for talking, I feel we need to be doing a lot more. And, you know, as I said, there's a lot of organizations doing stuff externally, which is fantastic. But if we had more hands on deck, you know, willing to write to MPs, put things on the agenda for when election time comes around, there's a lot more we can do. And everyone has got value and has got something to contribute, but we cannot be innocent bystanders, just standing by watching this, because people's lives are being affected. And although it's only 99% don't experience the criminal justice system, that 1% that does, every child matters. Every child matters. So we have got a lot more to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Sammy. Really appreciate your input. I value passion and I value experience, and you bring both of those. So thank you very much. I want to just say about Equal that we've embarked on these conversations because we do want to actually involve communities and organizations, and particularly younger people. And we'll try our very best to try and make sure, if there are young people on the call today, that we'll try and respond to some of their questions and comments. What we're going to do now is my good colleague, Head of Policy at Equal, Sade, is going to choose out or select questions, and we'll try and allocate them to our distinguished panel and have a conversation. We'll finish probably about 3 minutes before the end to say a few things about our sponsors and a survey we've launched today for young people, but we'll move swiftly on to the Q&A session. But thank you to the panelists.
Okay, thanks, Jeremy. There's a few questions that have come in prior to the event, so I'm going to tackle those first and then get to the questions in the chat box. I'll try and get through as many as I can. So one of the questions were, how are the specific experiences of Black girls different in the youth justice system? Maybe Nina or Sammy might be good for this one.
And if colleagues would be succinct so we can get as many questions as possible, I'd really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jeremy. Yeah, I think very briefly then, you know, we don't really know enough about the experiences of Black young girls, you know, particularly. So let's start from the starting point with their experiences of policing. And this is one area of research that we are going to be undertaking at Stopwatch, trying to really understand their experiences at the gateway of the system. I don't think we have enough information and basically need to understand that landscape a little bit better.
Yeah, I mean, I'd just add to that and say that, you know, in the Lamy review in the MOJ report 2016, it highlighted that, you know, BAME females are also experiencing disproportionality, more likely to be committed to trial for Crown Court, more likely higher arrest rates as well for Black females than white females. So we know the disproportionality is still there. I think there's definitely something though around the mentality of females to males in terms of the social science research that has been done in terms of the way females react to adversity in a way to males. And I think that ties into a lot of discussions around hypermasculinity and so forth. But the disproportionality is still there and evident for females of colour.
We wouldn't want to be asking Keith to respond to something like this 10 years from now, that what happened to, Black women or young girls, because they certainly are at risk. And, let's try and stem that now if we can, because there are issues of exploitation there as well, which need to be discussed. So, yeah.
Okay, thanks. We've got a question from Neve, I think. What are your thoughts on why the criminal justice system agencies have failed to meaningfully implement any of the recommendations made by the LAMI review? What should and can the government do to change that? It might be Keith. That would be a good question for, perhaps.
Thank you very much for the question. I think that what needs to be done in relation to response to that question, I think, is more awareness about what has been done in relation to the LAMI review. Now, there's been quite a lot of progress in relation to that. I'm not going to itemise every single aspect of what has been completed in relation to the LAMI review, but I think that more information needs to go out to the public in a way that's accessible to them, so that they can understand what's happening and what has been done in relation to this, and how much further government departments are going, and others, in relation to the recommendations that LAMI has, that David Lammy made in his review, sort of like just over 2 years ago now. For example, from the Youth Justice Board perspective, we had one recommendation from that, but we've taken the spirit of what came out of that really important and insightful review, and we've gone further than the one recommendation, and we've set a whole series of actions and objectives in train.
Thanks, Keith. We've got a question for the whole panel here. What changes do you think need to be made in order to reduce racial disparity? Are there specific strategies you believe youth offending teams can implement to ensure equality for BAME young people?
Can I respond to that to start with? I start with leadership, and I think leadership is really key in kind of making things happen. It starts with acknowledgement, and if there's a problem, to actually openly not just acknowledge it, but actually try and do something about it. So I think that's a good start, and from there, I think the leadership is also required to actually, at all levels of youth justice practice, down at a local level, where I think concerted attempts need to be made now to improve youth justice practice that is more inclusive, that is more understanding, is also representative of the communities as well that they engage with. And I think that's so important in the good work that youth justice practitioners do with other services, public services. What I think now they need to invest more in is actually working with community organizations, grassroots organizations, to really work together in collaboration. And I think that would be a good start. So that's just one thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
go ahead, Keith.
Sorry, Sammy. I didn't just wait for the chair to kind of call us in. Sorry. Yeah, I think youth offending teams have got a critical role here. They're on the front line. They're organisations that are in touch with what's happening with the community. They are in touch with community groups. They are also in touch with the wider statutory services as well that are operating locally. They've also got access to a lot of insight as well. What I've found with youth offending teams is that they are often aware of data and information that we are not aware of nationally. They're absolutely critical in relation to this. But the challenge and the question I'd put to youth offending teams is this on your agenda? Are you looking to see what's happening in your locality? And at the moment, I don't think sufficient of us are looking at what disproportionality and overrepresentation looks like in their area. And then if it is a theme and a need, is it then on their plans in relation to what they're doing? Is it clear about what youth offending teams are doing? And I think Nina's right, it is about leadership, but that leadership, not just from the youth offending teams, it's also around the support from the local authorities, which they're quite often housed within. So it's how are local authorities supporting what youth offending teams are trying to do locally. They are smaller parts of local authorities quite often, but significant in relation to potentially what they can achieve. So the first thing I think they need to do is really asking that question themselves: what do things look like locally in relation to overrepresentation, and then move from there.
Yeah, I'd just add a couple of things to that. Firstly, youth offending teams are in a quite unique position in the sense that they're not responsible for young people coming into the system, right? So when you're talking about disproportionality and reducing it, you want to look a bit further upstream in terms of police being the first point of contact, and then the courts, and then the magistrates. Where youth offending teams, I think, can actually have an impact is literally echoing what's just been said, taking some leadership. So what does your ethnicity data say? You know, gather your ethnicity data, look at the way in which the law, the interventions are being given out in your locality. Make sure your staff are trained up in unconscious bias training and cultural competency, and make sure your staff is reflective of the community. And I think in London, for the most part, from a lot of the youth offending teams that I've been in, it is quite reflective. But quite often when you start going further out, if we're talking sort of further out than just London, you start to see majority white females in this space working with the majority of the time Black, ethnic minority young men. So there's something there around gender and around ethnicity in terms of the representation of the individuals that are doing the work. But know what your ethnicity data is, and then have a plan as to how you're actually going to address that directly.
Thank you, Sammy. There's a question for Keith. Where can people look to find out more about statistics in disproportionality and resources?
If you look, I mentioned when I was speaking earlier on around the exploring racial disparity toolkit, well, exploring racial disparity. So if you put that search into Google, I think if you put White Youth Justice Board alongside that, that will take you straight to some up-to-date information. And we are trying to keep that up to date, which we refresh on an annual basis. And I do agree with what people are saying around statistics and stats, and people get a bit frustrated around it. But for me, I still think there is more to do and more to understand. As we've looked at that, looked at different parts of the system, we've actually found more aspects and more areas that we need to understand why there's disparity there. So I understand the need for action, and we do, you know, and I totally agree with that. But I also think that if we kind of jump sometimes some obvious conclusions, we miss out parts of the system that we should also be challenging and asking questions of. Say, for example, in relation to the need aspect, we only found out about that this year, looking at the statistics in relation to those children that were sentenced. We hadn't looked at that before. So it's around challenging the things which we think are obvious and actually trying to look at that kind of, you know, what's happened to people's lives in a little bit more detail, and then we'll be able to ask some more insightful questions of different parts of government and also statutory agencies about what they're doing and why.
I think if I may, Shade, if I can just add to that point, I think Keith's point there is really relevant to something I was suggesting earlier about the points of discretion. And there are many points of discretion in the system, in the process. And I think what we need to do, if we are going to address something like this, we really need to look at how we are going to understand those points, how decisions are being made, and to what extent we can actually, reform some of the decisions that are being made, perhaps in a very different way, with lack of understanding or cultural understanding. And I think that goes back to the professions of these different criminal justice agencies. We need to ask ourselves those critical questions. And I think the points of discretion still remain relevant and pertinent today.
Thank you, Nina. There's a question for the whole panel about defunding the police. So the question is, with growing support in the US for defunding police and prison systems, do you think this is or could be a movement which could gain traction in the UK? What are your opinions in the debate of defunding versus reform of the justice system in the UK?
Yeah, I'll jump in on this one then. When I hear defunding the police, what comes to my mind is about reallocating resources, essentially. It's about reallocating. So as I think of public health approach, I think of what was done in Scotland, in Glasgow with knife crime, in using money that goes towards criminal justice and actually putting that money in the community, in more youth centres, in more outreach workers, in more detached. I think the name's unfortunate. I think when you say defund the police, then people naturally get a lot of resistance. But we've still got this mentality, haven't we, of when it comes to crime and dealing with certain issues, the more police, the better. And as Katrina from Stopwatch likes to say, you know, it's like working in a pub and at the end of the night, you've got a problem with broken glasses and your solution is, well, let's just hire more cleaners. You know, no, you've got to change the way in which you do things. And so I think this idea of, well, when there's a problem, let's just throw more police at it, These are community issues. And these are issues which occur before people get to the criminal justice system. So instead of using all of that money to lock people up, which we know doesn't work from an evidence base, and what is it, something like 80,000 a year, whatever it is, to lock someone up? I think it's more than that. Why don't we use some of that money that is going into the criminal justice system, put that money back into the community? And that, for me, is what I hear and what I think of when I hear defund the police. Really, it needs to be renamed, really, about just reallocating resources in the community so you empower those communities to do themselves.
I totally agree with Sammy there. And I also know, speaking from experience, the Reclaim Justice Network that I was part of, and I know a colleague who's present here from the network as well. And I do wish to take this opportunity to just remind ourselves that, you know, we have actually done created, because I think amongst ourselves as a community of people, practitioners working in the system or working in the charitable organizations or even working as scholars in universities, I think we all understand there's a sense of frustration about the lack of change. And I think we had these conversations and we continue to have these conversations regarding dismantling of the criminal justice system, that we actually don't need more of it. In fact, I was a bit concerned again today listening to our to Rishi Sunak pouring more money. I do understand the need for money and resources, but actually let's stop thinking about expanding the number of prison spaces in this country. I think we have enough already. We should be working to reducing them, not increasing them. And I think that money, like Sammy is saying, we wish to kind of bring back into the communities, to pour it into prevention, to work with young people. And at Stopwatch, my colleague is here, Neil Brown. He's doing some excellent work with the youth justice system locally with the youth offending teams, doing a series of workshops, really engaging young people who are at risk, just informing them about, you know, how to engage safely with the police, how to engage on the street safely with the police. I just think it's so important. And regarding statistics and data, I mean, we've also published the Color of Injustice report. I know that Neil probably has put a little link for that, but I just think we need less of criminal justice. We need more of social justice solutions. That's what we need.
Okay, and finally myself, I'll move over slightly in relation to debates, and so I'll just say, what is policing there to do? Why do we have the police? The police are not solely there around criminal justice. They are also there to protect us and also look after us, and that's an important function that they provide. I think that part of what Sammy and Nina say, I would agree with in relation to prevention. I think that, and also diversion. I think that the police are part of the answer, and there needs to be a greater focus in that preventative aspect and also diversion aspect, and also ensuring that everybody has equal opportunity to be diverted and also prevented from coming into the justice system. So I think that police are part of the solution in relation to keeping people out of the justice system. But there's also an important aspect to this as well. Another part of it is about this investment in services, other services, youth services, and other services that will help to keep people out of the justice system. You know, investing in education, social care, and health, for example. Those are also things that need to be invested in education. It's not necessarily about taking money away from a public service, which is challenging which is also struggling. It's about how do we ensure that the public services have the support and the resources that they need to support us.
Can I ask you a question?
Is that me?
No, it's Jeremy. I'm just wanting to ask, there's been a hell of a lot of attention on the training of police officers and to another extent prison officers, and yet we still see this thousands and thousands of young black men and boys stopped in search, and another focus on training again. Do you think we'll ever get it right with training and to change behaviour?
What I'd say is I think that we are in a place where there are more. This conversation we're having now is not a new conversation. I mean, the whole conversation that we are having this evening is not new. You know, I was a police officer 30 odd years ago. You know, you had disproportionality and overrepresentation in the system for a significant amount of time. But I think that where we're at now, because of all of the things that have happened, all of the awful things that have happened, all of the things which we can't justify that have happened, there is a groundswell of a time now where people are saying we need to have some positive change. Now, within policing, for example, I feel and I believe that is recognised, and there's an increasing number of senior police officers and also wider that believe that. So I feel that things are changing for the better, and you can see it in relation to the conversations that we are being able to have behind the scenes. For example, not all the conversations that we have publicly, but we do challenge privately in relation to that, and we have seen change as a result of that. For example, you know, if we talk about COVID and the police response in relation to that, we were concerned about the over-criminalisation of children within the system. So we had conversation very early on. You know, we had senior police officers who were responsible for the approach and the strategy around how policing was going to be impacted on communities and in relation to keeping them safe and also protecting people, how that would actually be deployed. Those conversations were held in a really positive way, and we saw an approach to policing which mirrored and reflected what our input in relation to that. So that's really positive. If you look back years ago, you would not have had that kind of dialogue going on so much. So I feel that dialogue's increasing. We're moving to a more positive space in relation to policing, whereby police are listening and things are changing. Are we in the right place at the moment? Not yet. Are we moving in the right direction? I believe so.
Thanks, Keith. I'll hand back to Sade.
I'm mindful, of course, of the time, and I know we mentioned earlier that we would leave a gap in time if there was anybody on the call who has any lived experience with the youth justice system or wanted to share any of their personal experiences. So if you do let me know in the chat panel. I haven't seen anything yet. In the meantime, it's a question for Keith again. The age of criminal responsibility remains 10 at age 10 in England and Wales, despite it being age 12 in neighbouring Scotland. Will the Youth Justice Board be advocating for England and Wales to set a better standard, one that at least meets the absolute minimum of 14 recommended by the UNCRC? Sorry, I don't know who the UNCRC are, but...
It's the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child.
There you go.
Yeah, no, it's the UN, and the UN have said, I think they've said 14 is the age of that they think is the age of criminal responsibility, and also some additional aspects to put on in relation to that. I think that if you look at the differences that we have in relation to the 4 nations, with Scotland being 12 years of age, with England and Wales where it's 10. There are some other European countries whereby you've got the age of 12, and others where you've got 14. I think there is sufficient there for us to at least say that there is time to have, that we should be having a look and examining the evidence around whether or not the age of criminal responsibility is right at 10 years of age. I think there is sufficient evidence there to ask that question, for that question to be asked.
Thank you, Keith. There is a question in the chat by Brendan, but I'm not sure. I'm just going to read it out. You may understand it better than me. I think it's for everybody. High levels of previous and current adverse life experiences. Are agencies in the youth justice system further punishing abuse? That's the first question. And the second one is, how would you propose to get sentences whose sentence on the facts for every individual child to explain the custodial and remand disparities that you highlighted? So I can repeat the first question if you like. So it was about the levels of previous and current adverse life experience and whether the agencies in the youth justice system are further punishing abuse. I'm assuming they mean the abuse that the person or the individual has already experienced.
I can have put a response to that. What I've found is that agencies, statutory agencies, starting from a health perspective, actually now recognise the impact of trauma on children and the outcomes and the different outcomes of in relation to individualised trauma and also the environment they're in, and then the impact that that's likely to have on their outcomes, whether it be in relation to health or into the justice system. Now, one of the things that can look at, and one of the most, the extreme end, it can lead to death if you have a number of adverse childhood experiences. The ultimate you can have is death, but also you can also have into the criminal justice system as well. But it's not it's not a necessary pathway. It's not that you are necessarily going to go in that direction. But there is a sufficient weight of evidence there that the more adverse childhood experiences you have, the more likelihood is that things are going to be challenging for you in relation to health and other matters. So recognising that, the way that statutory agencies are looking to use that is through a trauma-informed approach, try and use it in a preventative way to try and look at those children that have or are likely to have more adverse childhood experiences, trying to use that to prevent more harm to children, trying to reduce something which doesn't have to be inevitable. So I would say that statutory agencies are trying to use it in a positive way, those traumas which we all know about and understand that children and others face, to try and use in a positive way to prevent further harm happening to children.
If I could just add to that, Keith, as well, I think along with that, although more organisations are starting to use a more trauma-informed approach, there does need to be more work done around bias, and especially the views of young Black males, because they're often seen as unworthy victims, and so even though they may be children, in the eyes of the court, sometimes they get treated as adults. And we see this in terms of how they're treated via sentencing. So when we start talking about trauma and start talking about abuse, it's about trying to get those who are sentencing, judges, magistrates, really starting to challenge their own perceptions and bias and see child first, offender second. The way things are at the moment, it's offender first, child second. And so I think that there needs to be some change around that. And just on the second point, Brendan, around the sentences, I think we need to be a lot more direct with the judiciary. A lot is in their hands. The data's there, the evidence base is there. I think we need to stop pussyfooting around, and there needs to be some very hard, direct conversations with the judiciary, the evidence put in front of them. And it needs to be said very clearly that the justice you receive in this country is based on the colour of your skin. That is a fact. The evidence is there. So we need to put it in front of them and say, this is the evidence. What are you guys going to do to make it more just and more equal? Because I don't really see what else that needs to be done. And the judiciary they've got this kind of status that no one can challenge them. And if we claim to be in a just society and have a just legal system, we should welcome challenge. As a social work practitioner, I was always taught you should be challenging yourself and in your practice. So why the judiciary not being challenged when the evidence is clearly there that the system is operating in a racist and a discriminatory fashion?
Can I just add to that? That's really important, Sammy. And I think one of the points that we also need to recognize as practitioners, but also into the system as cases progress and at the court stages, prosecution stages, is to be able to better understand what informs that trauma for that particular individual. And sometimes we forget about these really kind of prior experiences of racism and discrimination. That all forms part of that experience, and that is never unpacked or discussed or made relevant. So going back through to sentencing stages, I think what we also need to recognize, just kind of using critical race theory tenets here, it's really important. There's always a different way, and sentencers know that. At those points of discretion, again, There is always a path A or B, and people make their choices. So we really need to work with the judiciary and be able to better explore some of the points that Keith, relevant points that Keith made.
Can I jump in there now, Sade?
Yes, Jeremy, go ahead.
I'm conscious it's 1929, and I think we're due to finish at past.
Yes.
So I think, and just to say, thank you to everyone who's joined the conversation online today. We really appreciate you participating in this conversation. I'd like to thank Keith, Sammy, and Nina for your inputs. Really appreciate it. I'd also like to thank Sade, our head of policy, and Payal Bavsar, who's the comms and engagement officer that's organised the event today. Really appreciate that. She hasn't been with BTEC a very long time, so she's done a great job, and we really appreciate it. As you know, no charity like BTEC can do anything without financial support, and we'd like to thank our funders, the Barrow Cadbury Trust, Lankelly Chase Foundation, SB Fairbairn Foundation, and AB Charitable Trust for supporting us and doing this work. We really genuinely want to continue to engage with our communities and organisations and public and private and voluntary sector organisations to tackle these problems. Clearly, we've got a long way to go. There have been some improvements, but obviously by no stretch of the imagination enough. As I said at the very beginning, the numbers have come down of young people in custody, which is obviously a very good thing. It is below 1,000, but that disproportionality is going in the wrong direction, and we've got to stop it and reverse it. And plus, you know, there are people in the youth justice system who are not in custody, and obviously we need to be mindful of the outcomes that they achieve as well. But clearly, we have to work together, as Keith has said, and keep supporting and sharing. But we have to challenge each other and make sure our institutions tackle the biases, the inequalities around race and other protected characteristics, and become better organisations, and that we can make sure that everyone's accountable for what they do at every level, particularly in youth custody and in prisons in particular, because we've got much to do to improve outcomes for everyone, particularly Black and Asian and Muslim individuals in the justice system. So thank you, everyone, and please do keep in touch and look out for a survey we've launched today for young Black and Asian people that we want to complete and get information from about their views about employment, apprenticeships, COVID-19. Clearly, we're in a major recession now, and it's going to be very hard for young people, as we've already seen, in terms of unemployment and their prospects. And we've always obviously got to work together to make sure all young people don't fall off the support radar and get into custody. We need to make sure these numbers are managed and managed down, not up. So we've got a lot of work. Everyone's got a lot of work to do, clearly, with the recession and the impact on all our people in the country. So thank you, everyone, and speak to you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, BTEC team. Thank you. Bye-bye.